Yes.
Level.
Absolutely. I think most kids can improve, especially if people can do the diet, like meat, vegetables, fruit, nuts, seeds, and eggs. Obviously not if it's anaphylactic. But what's in our food supply, the propionic acid that's in our grains, stops the motility. It impairs mitochondrial production of ATP. It impairs methylation. It binds carnitine. So every time your kid eats those food, it's slowing the brain down further, right? It's not your fault or their fault, but you put them on a diet, meat, vegetables, fruit, nuts, seeds, and eggs, almost all kids improve. And if they don't, it's because the food they've already eaten is still stuck in there. So once you get that out, it depends on their age. Like, I'm careful about this conversation because there is a lot of work that gets into making the ATP you need to recover this system. So the mitochondria, if you're not talking, that's mitochondrial, right? So all speech delay is mitochondrial. So then what is stopping the mitochondria from producing enough energy here? That's what you have to figure out. And so I have a parent, again, I talked to them yesterday. It's about 3.5 years in and the kid's starting to talk. And they did the diet. Super strict. They did tons of bowel clear outs. They were super strict with the supplements. And I think those parents, you can reap the rewards and have them become verbal. We were in that group of parents. Like, Magnus had apraxia. So he didn't start saying anything for 18 months of treatment. It was 18 months of hardcore treatment. So I know that this is not necessarily like a warm and fuzzy message, but some people who say they've tried everything haven't. And if you haven't tried the diet, you haven't tried everything. And if you haven't done bowel clear outs, you haven't tried everything. And I think that sucks. And I think some people have the ability to do it, and that is a privilege or a blessing. And because it's not easy to do, it's expensive, you don't have the hope left. Like, I feel like I can understand many of those things, but a lot of kids who don't become verbal, it's because you don't do the steps or you don't do them for long enough. And then even if your child doesn't become verbal, you still have to fix those things anyway. And that sucks too. Sucks is a very medical word, but right, you do all that work. The RPM group has been really phenomenal to me, the folks who communicate off a letterboard. I had one young man come in, and by all appearances, he was, not a high-functioning kid. He's had a lot of severely autistic symptoms. I don't really like those terms, but he had severe sensory issues. He put pretty much everything in his mouth in my room, and even had an accident, and he wasn't a young kid, so I think the scratching, biting, that kind of stuff. And anyway, no outward, not verbal. And so at the end of the visit, the mom asked me, "Do you have any questions for him?" And I think she just saw my face. I was like, and this is years ago now. And then she pulls out the letterboard, and it's like, it's got like A, B, C, D, and he points to it, and I watch him spell. "Do you think I'm stupid?" And I just started crying. I just started crying, which I do almost every time I tell that story. But, and so he understood everything, and he just couldn't control his body. And he has actually written about that since. He's like, he can't get his brain to control his mouth, and he can't get his brain to control his body. So, you could do this biomedical for 3 to 4 years, and your child gets control over their body. They may not get control over their mouth, but they guarantee you they have a better life. Mm-hmm. So, it's being verbal. Obviously, that's what we all wanted. That's what I wanted. But it takes a lot to get a nonverbal kid verbal if they're apraxic or their mitochondria is really crashed. But you can do it. And a lot of those kids have chronic infections too. Yeah. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. It's the hardest thing we ever did. I'm in denial a little bit about having hormones cause like hot flashes and stuff, and I get all red now. And I'm younger than my sister, so she teases me because it looks like I'm going into menopause earlier, but it was well earned, right? Like, it's hard work, and I would do it again. I think my husband, my kids who helped out a tremendous amount, we got Magnus back, so it was worth it. I call it the core 4, and we have 4 common sort of pathways that lead to diseases and disorders, right? So we have the IDO pathway, which is inflammatory. We have the microbiome, which you mentioned. We have inflammatory things like histamine. We have methylation, mitochondrial issues. So if you address those, you can stabilize a lot of chronic health issues. Mm-hmm. So my core 4 is used a lot for a lot of other things outside of just autism. But then if you need more mitochondrial support for language, kids who are apraxic, like Claudia Morris, her study showed that 67.7% of kids diagnosed with autism also had some form of apraxia, right? They don't have enough energy in their muscles. So then that's when you can layer on other mitochondrial supports. Vitamin E in mixed tocopherols in high enough amounts. So it's 100 milligrams per kilogram. So you have to pair that with vitamin K. Otherwise, you're going to end up with bruises and bleeding, right? Because it's a very high dose, but safe dose of vitamin E when you have someone supporting your care. Omega-6, which is GLA, which, if you have enough B6, GLA from omega-6 turns into DGLA, which is very anti-inflammatory. So then you turn all the cells in the body more anti-inflammatory. Phosphatidylcholine or glycerophosphocholine. Phosphatidylcholine more for articulation clarity, glycerophosphocholine more for like focus, attention, working memory, and then acetyl-L-carnitine. I can't believe I forgot that one because I think acetyl-L-carnitine is like the gateway to recovering many of your mitochondrial-based delays. So that's fine and gross motor delays, and keeping in mind that your eyes and the muscles in your eyes is the finest fine motor skill we have, right? Eyes and mouth are the finest fine motor skills. People think about the pen and how we hold the pen or how we dress ourselves, but your mitochondria needs to support your vision and your communication at a high level if you're going to recover those and integrate those systems. So, but there's other things like CoQ10, and that's again where it gets into the individualized treatment testing. There's great tests out there, like I love the Nutristat test by US Biotech. I love the microbiome testing. There's a big giant one for adults. I usually do it's slightly less expensive. I think it's around 780, maybe. I shouldn't necessarily say prices, but it's got 5 tests in one though. Like it's got serum amino acids. It does the full omega fatty acids. It does heavy metals. It does a full oat. So it does a urine. It does a full organic acid inside that. And then it does zinc copper ratios. Like it's pretty comprehensive. And I think if you're going to kind of get into like what supplement should I invest in, you could do testing, or sometimes I do individual trials, right? Like you do a trial of high dose CoQ10, do it for a month or two. If it's a big home run, keep it in. If not, you move on to another supplement to trial. I do love organic acid testing. I think it's non-invasive and accurate. So it tests, like 48 strains of yeast, 22 strains of Clostridia, tests neurotransmitters, mitochondrial function, some nutrients. I think mycotoxin testing is becoming something that I think is more and more important, because if you don't do it in the beginning, those kids don't move, and then you're wasting time. So it is, all these tests are expensive. Unfortunately, it's about $400 or $500 to test mycotoxins, but if you test them early on, then you might save time. Yeah, I would give glutathione liposomal or nebulized before mycotoxin test to try to make sure it's more accurate. I really only recommend tests that I find helpful and reliable, but inside, I think the Clostridia marker is particularly important. Clostridia causes such slow motility. It, does the same thing that the grains and dairy do, because Clostridia makes propionic acid. So it's, it impairs motility, it binds carnitine, so you get the essential fatty acid deficiency, remembering that fats need to go into the mitochondria to produce energy. So all delays, all fine and gross motor delays have their roots in not enough fat either being absorbed or transferred, shuttled with carnitine, right?
지방이 미토콘드리아로 가서 에너지를 만들어내려면 카르니틴이 지방을 옮겨줘야 되는 건데, 클로스트리디아균이 프로피온산을 생성해서 프로피온산이 카르니틴하고 결합해버리는 바람에 카르니틴이 부족해서 지방이 미토콘드리아로 가지 못한다. 그래서 에너지를 만들지 못한다. 그런 이야기입니다.
I don't think it's hard to eradicate. And I didn't mean to jump in there. It's just I get excited about this answer because one of the labs that tests Clostridia, they actually came up because we obviously order a ton of tests through them. So we went out for dinner with them, and the son said to the dad, who owned the lab at the time, he doesn't now. He said, "Dad, this is the clinic that their Clostridia markers come down faster than anywhere in the world." And so, the dad, who's a PhD biochemist, he's like, "Oh, that's right. Yeah, the lab techs put your organic acid test up on the bulletin board." So they identify that out of all the clinics in the world, our numbers for Clostridia came down the fastest. So sort of the funny part of the story is he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, Clostridia was studied in Canada by Dr. Derek McFabe, who's a neuroscientist and neurologist who's been studying Clostridia and propionic acid for the better part of 20 years and won a top 50 scientific findings in Canadian history and spoke at the Nobel Laureate Conference." I said, this research was done in Canada, so I had lots of information, and basically Clostridia feeds on carbohydrates. So if you take the carbohydrates, you'll starve the Clostridia, and then you strip it out with Saccharomyces boulardii once you're ready. And, in the interim, you keep it under control with vitamin A, because vitamin A controls the microbiome. So all our natural killer cells need vitamin A to function. And so once your vitamin A is low, your immune system can't get rid of these bad guys. So I don't find it hard to treat Clostridia, but people do find the diet hard. I get that, but my mentor, and she's a fantastic, brilliant, but also tough lady. She's a pediatrician down in Jacksonville, Florida, Dr. Julie Buckley. She said autism is hard. The diet's not hard. So you make that choice every day. You either feed your child and get them better, or you feed them the crap they become addicted to, because that's what their brains do. Unfortunately, they're highly prone to addiction. That's where they're prone to being addicted to their screens and the sugar and the junk food. They don't like pizza. They're addicted to it, right? So you treat it like addiction. You treat it and remove it. Meat, vegetables, fruit, nuts, seeds, and eggs. People are so funny because they're like, well, what will I feed them? I'm like, any meat, any vegetable, any fruit, any nut, seed, egg. Everyone asks it.
Yeah, right.
Because our whole world is with carbohydrates, but look how sick we are. Like, it's not just autism, right? We have, if you look at the American numbers, like 1 in 42 kids has autism, but 1 in 5 Canadian children has developmental delay. 1 in 3 has a chronic inflammatory disorder, eczema, allergies, eczema. So we're not a healthy population. So right, that behavior issues too. Without a diagnosis, parents are, they'll bring their kids in, and like I had this kid, and they're like, he won't go to school. He just wants to stay home and play video games. He's maybe like 15, 16. All he eats is junk food, and he drinks pop and plays video games. I'm like, he's just addicted. So they're like, well, what do you do? And I'm like, take it away. Like, take it away. Give them their childhood back, right? Well, it's counterintuitive because we live in this world. So that it is sort of like you have to take a step away and be like, what are we doing? Like, what are we feeding our kids? What are we feeding their mind? What are we feeding them food-wise? And so, it's empowering to cook to get your children better, as you know, right? I know it helped to heal my heart as we went through this very difficult process. But like, I was in the kitchen doing the work it took to get him better, and then it also helped my other 2 kids like a ton. And that was a huge blessing because they ended up, obviously chronic infections is familial, so they ended up really needing that diet as well. Well, it's interesting that I love this question actually, because I built my practice on these kids, like the kids where nothing worked for or everything aggravated, right? So you can't take a fish oil, can't take magnesium, can't take B12. They aggravate on everything, or they've tried everything, even things like stem cell hyperbarics, and nothing works. And most of those times, the kids, they have stool that starts under the stomach and it's filled throughout the whole intestine. A lot of those kids have Lyme, like chronic Lyme disease with the co-infections that come along with it. They might have strange viruses. The Epstein-Barr is quite disruptive, right? Because it takes a lot of energy from the immune system. And then mold. Those mold kids don't move because the mold, like I mentioned before, stops the production of bile. And without bile, you can't break down fat. But keep in mind, bile is also laxative. So that stuff just sits there. The bile salts sit there. They're literally sandy. And so does the sticky, undigested fat. It's just a clog. It's a mess up there. So I had this kid recently, nothing was working. This is last year. And I said to the parents, like, I don't know if it will work, because certainly there are kids it doesn't work for. I think you keep trying, you keep looking, as long as you have the energy to hope. But certainly I have kids that this has not worked for. But this family, I said, I don't know what else to recommend. I want you to give them 2 to 3 months of diarrhea with a daily electrolyte. Obviously, we checked in to make sure there was no problems with like too much diarrhea or fatigue, any of that stuff. Don't do any of that on your own, right? Like, you just need help if you're going to do sort of aggressive bowel clearing. But after that period of time, we followed out 8 weeks later, and he finally had started improving because he had pooped out sludge. So he was not absorbing anything they were putting in, because the biofilm is a physical entity. It's like a snot stuck to the gut wall. So anything you put into the gut has to be absorbed. And if you have a lot of biofilm, it won't absorb. I mean, I would still try to find someone medically trained. It's medical treatment. I think you need someone medical involved. Yeah, it's hard. And I know that access to care can be very difficult. But anyone can do the diet. There's books out there like Martha Herbert's book, The Autism Revolution, Grain Brain, by Dr. David Perlmutter. I wrote a manual on this that's not so much the research. It's just like, what do you do? My steps, right? My process. You can do the recommended dose on the bottle for kids, right? You can do that as a starting point. And, you know, if you can find a practitioner to help you go into those more maybe therapeutic doses, then they don't have to be an expert to give you dosing. And I think the biggest thing that I've discovered that I can share with people is that aggravations are 99% of the time, I want to say, but I'll say 90 to 95% of the time, it's the gut. Just get the stuff out of the gut. Talk to your doctor, get a bowel x-ray. They're filled with old mucus and stool and fecal matter. Clear out the old junk. And so my practice was built on aggravations and on kids who nothing was working for, because that whole intestinal tube was all filled with literally old stool. So they jump, they run back and forth, they're agitated, they're irritable, they chew on things, they put stuff in their mouth, they tap for some reason, they hit their chin here, you know, they teeth grind. There almost always is. Yeah, because soft stool comes right past the old stool. The old stuff stays in there, right? So if you live in a house and it's garbage day, every 2 weeks you put your garbage out on the curb. Just because your neighbor puts out 2 bags of garbage doesn't mean their house isn't filled with garbage. So what's coming out doesn't tell you about what's staying in. And the big thing is that our kids have mitochondrial impairment. If this system doesn't have enough energy and their eyes don't have enough energy, sometimes they don't have enough energy to help themselves get dressed or hold a pencil, why would their intestines have enough energy? They don't. They're really, really clogged. And it's not fancy, but that's, people tease me, including my daughter. She calls me Dr. Plumber. But I don't have to be fancy if I'm getting really good results, and we are. And I'll say it, people go for stem cell or hyperbarics, and those can be very helpful. Hyperbarics, I would say, more so than stem cell. But diet and clearing the bowel out and some of these fundamental or foundational treatments, they help more than those big, expensive, fancy treatments. They're just harder work. Urinary accidents too. Sorry, I should have mentioned. Urinary accidents are almost always the bowel. Delayed toilet training is almost always the bowel. Well, I think if you're taking supplements on your own without the help of a healthcare professional, then take what's recommended on the bottle. In the higher doses, if you're working with someone who has training, I don't ever see liver kidney function problems, but lots of parents do worry about them, and then we do blood testing. So you test the liver and kidney function, test it once or twice a year with a blood test. So the blood testing, parents worry about upsetting their kids, and I get it, but it's medical. If your child had Crohn's or rheumatoid arthritis or ankylosing spondylosis, or they had, God forbid, something scary, dangerous, like cancer, they would get blood testing. Nobody would ever say, I can't test my child. So children with autism have lifelong brain inflammation. Their brain tissue, not to be gruesome, but once they pass away, their brain is inflamed their entire life. So they need to be medically assessed and treated. It may upset them, but if you're really worried about kidney and liver function, just test it. But you're right, most of the supplements help it. Yeah.
That's it for this interview.
Oh, wow, thank you. Thanks for taking the time and getting everything set up.